USA-193, the spy satellite that died at birth. In December 2006, the United States launched USA-193, a classified reconnaissance satellite built by Lockheed Martin for the National Reconnaissance Office. The satellite was part of the top-secret Future Imagery Architecture program, designed to provide high-resolution surveillance capabilities. The launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base appeared successful, with the satellite reaching its intended orbit at approximately 300 kilometers altitude. But something went catastrophically wrong almost immediately. Shortly after reaching orbit, USA-193 lost power and stopped responding to ground controllers. The satellite went completely silent. No telemetry, no response to commands, nothing. It became a dead 2-ton object tumbling through space, completing an orbit every 90 minutes. What makes this failure particularly suspicious is what happened next. The satellite's orbital path took it over numerous countries, and its high-resolution cameras and sensors, even if non-functional, contained classified technology that the U.S. government didn't want falling into foreign hands. The satellite carried advanced optical systems, sophisticated signal processing equipment, and encryption technology that represented years of classified research. For over a year, the U.S. military tracked the dead satellite as its orbit slowly decayed. Atmospheric drag was pulling it lower, and eventually it would re-enter and crash somewhere on Earth. Pentagon officials became increasingly concerned about where it might land and what technology might survive the re-entry. In February 2008, the U.S. military made an unprecedented decision. They would shoot down USA-193 with a missile. The official reason given to the public was safety. The satellite's hydrazine fuel tank contained approximately 450 kilograms of toxic propellant that might survive re-entry and pose a hazard to populated areas. But many analysts were skeptical of this explanation. Thousands of satellites have re-entered the atmosphere with fuel tanks aboard, and none had warranted a military intercept. The Space Shuttle Columbia disaster in 2003 had scattered debris across Texas and Louisiana, including hazardous materials, without prompting advanced military intervention. The real reason, critics suggested, was to destroy the satellite's classified components before it fell over another country's territory, where the wreckage could be recovered and analyzed. On February 21, 2008, the operation was executed. A SM-3 missile fired from the USS Lake Erie in the Pacific Ocean struck the satellite at an altitude of 247 kilometers, destroying it completely. But questions remain about why USA-193 failed in the first place. Reconnaissance satellites are among the most carefully designed spacecraft built. They cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Some estimates place USA-193's cost at over $1 billion and undergo rigorous quality control. For one to fail completely upon reaching orbit is extremely rare. Some analysts have speculated that USA-193 was disabled deliberately, possibly by an anti-satellite weapon test by another nation. The satellite's orbit took it over China, Russia, and other countries with developing space warfare capabilities. If a foreign power had tested a directed energy weapon or electronic warfare system against USA-193, the U.S. government would have strong reasons to destroy the evidence before it could be recovered and analyzed. The National Reconnaissance Office has never provided details about what caused USA-193's failure, citing classification. The satellite that went silent has kept its secrets, even in death. Phobos 2, lost over Mars moon. In July 1988, the Soviet Union launched Phobos 2, an ambitious mission to study Mars and its mysterious moon Phobos. The spacecraft carried a sophisticated array of instruments, including gamma-ray spectrometers, infrared imaging systems, and 2 landers designed to touch down on Phobos' surface. The mission represented one of the most technically complex interplanetary ventures the Soviets had ever attempted. Phobos 2 successfully reached Mars orbit in January 1989 and began its scientific program. For 2 months, it functioned perfectly, sending back valuable data about Mars's atmosphere, magnetic field, and surface. The spacecraft conducted several orbital maneuvers to position itself for the final approach to Phobos. Then, on March 27, 1989, as the spacecraft maneuvered to within 50 meters of Phobos for close-range observations and lander deployment, it suddenly stopped transmitting. The loss of contact occurred at the most critical phase of the mission, just as Phobos 2 was about to achieve its primary objectives. The last communication from Phobos 2 was described by Soviet mission controllers as unusual. According to statements released by the Soviet Space Agency, the spacecraft had transmitted data showing that its orientation had suddenly changed, as if it had been struck or pushed by something. The spacecraft's attitude control system reported unexpected forces acting on the vehicle. Then, silence. Soviet officials released limited information about the mission's end. They stated that communication was lost due to a failure in the onboard computer, but provided no technical details about what caused the computer to fail. Western space agencies, monitoring the mission through their own tracking stations, noted the abrupt nature of the communications loss. What made the incident particularly mysterious was the timing. Phobos 2 went silent just as it was about to deploy 2 landers onto Phobos' surface and conduct close-range observations of the Moon's strange features. Phobos itself is an enigma. It has an unusually low density for a rocky body, and an orbit that's mysteriously circular and aligned with Mars's equator. Some of the spacecraft's final images, released years later by Russian space officials, showed unusual features on or near Phobos that have never been adequately explained. Marina Popovich, a Soviet test pilot and engineer with connections to the space program, claimed in later years that she had seen classified images from Phobos 2 showing an elongated cylindrical shadow on the Martian surface, as if cast by an object between the spacecraft and Mars. The Soviet space program launched a successor mission, Mars 96, which included components designed to study Phobos, but it failed during launch when the 4th stage rocket failed to fire. No spacecraft has approached Phobos that closely since, and the mystery of what caused Phobos 2 to go silent over the Martian moon remains officially unexplained. The South Atlantic Anomaly, Casualties. The South Atlantic Anomaly is a region where Earth's radiation belts dip closest to the planet's surface, creating an area of intense radiation that extends from South America across the South Atlantic Ocean towards southern Africa. In this region, the Van Allen radiation belts come within 200 kilometers of Earth's surface, compared to their normal altitude of 1,000 kilometers or more. Satellites passing through experience significantly higher radiation exposure, which can damage electronics, corrupt data, and cause malfunctions. Numerous satellites have experienced failures while passing through this region, but several cases stand out as particularly suspicious because the satellites were specifically designed to withstand such radiation, and because the failures occurred in patterns suggesting more than simple radiation damage. In May 1998, the Galaxy Fui communication satellite experienced a complete failure of its primary control processor while passing over the South Atlantic Anomaly. The satellite provided pager services to over 80% of the United States, and its failure knocked out approximately 45 million pagers, disrupted air traffic control communications, shut down credit card verification systems across the country, and disabled hospital patient monitoring systems. The economic impact was estimated at over $50 million for just the first day. ASAT, the satellite's operator, attributed the failure to radiation damage from the anomaly. But critics noted that Galaxy 4 was specifically hardened against radiation and had successfully passed through the anomaly thousands of times during its operational life. The satellite had been in service since 1993, making about 6,000 passes through the anomaly without incident. The sudden catastrophic failure after 5 years of successful operations suggested something beyond normal radiation exposure. In October 2003, Japan's ADEOS-2 Earth observation satellite, a sophisticated spacecraft carrying instruments to monitor global climate, lost power while passing over the South Atlantic Anomaly. The satellite experienced a sudden failure of its solar panel's power distribution system. Japanese space agency JAXA attributed this to radiation-induced damage, but the satellite had been designed with redundant systems specifically to survive such conditions. In March 2016, the Japanese Hitomi X-ray astronomy satellite, one of the most advanced space telescopes ever built, experienced a catastrophic failure while passing over the South Atlantic anomaly. The satellite began spinning uncontrollably at approximately 20 rotations per minute, and ground controllers lost contact. Later observations showed that Hitomi had broken into multiple pieces. JAXA concluded that a software error caused the satellite to fire its thrusters incorrectly, leading to the spin and eventual structural failure. But the timing, occurring during passage through the anomaly, raised questions about whether radiation-induced computer errors played a role in triggering the malfunction. What makes these South Atlantic anomaly failures suspicious is their timing and the fact that they affected satellites supposedly hardened against radiation. Some researchers have suggested that the anomaly might be used as cover for testing anti-satellite weapons. If a satellite were hit by a directed energy weapon while passing through the anomaly, the failure could be plausibly attributed to radiation. China's mysterious satellite shutdowns. Between 2007 and 2010, several Western satellites experienced unexplained interruptions or anomalies while their ground tracks passed over China. The incidents were initially dismissed as coincidental technical issues, but the pattern became too consistent to ignore and eventually led to official investigations and diplomatic protests. In October 2007 and July 2008, Terra and Aqua, two NASA Earth observation satellites that are part of the agency's Earth observing system, experienced unexpected interference while passing over China. The satellite's command and telemetry systems were temporarily disrupted, causing brief losses of control. During these incidents, which lasted between 2 and 12 minutes, ground controllers found themselves locked out of the satellite's command systems. In 2008, the Landsat-7 Earth observation satellite experienced repeated anomalies in its command system while passing over Chinese territory. The satellite would temporarily stop responding to commands from ground stations, then resume normal operations once it had passed beyond China's borders. Over a 6-month period, Landsat-7 experienced at least a dozen such incidents. Most significantly, in June 2009, a report to the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission revealed that Chinese ground stations had interfered with 2 U.S. government satellites on multiple occasions. The report stated that in October 2007 and July 2008, attackers achieved some level of access to the satellite's command systems, reaching a point where they could issue commands but not control. This distinction is important. The attackers demonstrated they could send commands to the satellites but hadn't taken complete control of the spacecraft's functions. The technical evidence suggested that the Chinese stations had transmitted unauthorized command signals on the satellite's control frequencies, exploiting vulnerabilities in the satellite's command authentication systems. The Chinese government denied any involvement in the incidents, calling the allegations groundless accusations. But the pattern of incidents occurring repeatedly, specifically over China, affecting only command systems while leaving scientific functions intact, made natural malfunctions an implausible explanation. What made these incidents particularly concerning was that the affected satellites were civilian, not military. If China was willing to interfere with scientific Earth observation satellites, the implications for military reconnaissance satellites were alarming. Since these incidents became public, specific details about satellite interference have been increasingly classified. The GPS blackout over Iraq. In March 2003, at the beginning of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, reports emerged of GPS signal disruptions in the region that threatened to compromise American military operations. U.S. forces relied heavily on GPS for navigation, targeting precision-guided munitions, coordinating troop movements, and synchronizing communications. If those signals could be disrupted, it would significantly impair American military capabilities. Multiple U.S. aircraft and ground units reported GPS signal loss or degradation while operating in specific areas of Iraq, particularly around Baghdad and other strategic locations. The outages were localized and temporary, typically lasting between 5 and 30 minutes, but occurred in patterns that suggested deliberate jamming rather than equipment malfunction. The U.S. military initially suspected Iraqi forces were using GPS jammers, devices that broadcast interference on GPS frequencies to deny navigation capabilities to attackers. These were known to have been sold to Iraq by Russia and other countries in the years before the invasion. American forces did locate and destroy several Iraqi GPS jammers during the early days of the invasion. However, some GPS disruptions couldn't be attributed to ground-based jamming. Ground-based jammers can affect local areas but can't reach far beyond line of sight. Yet some U.S. units reported GPS problems across wide geographic areas simultaneously, suggesting interference at the satellite level rather than ground-based jamming. More concerning were reports that some GPS satellites themselves experienced anomalies while passing over the Middle East region during the conflict. According to space industry sources, several GPS satellites transmitted corrupted or degraded signals while their orbital paths took them over Iraq and surrounding areas. The U.S. Air Force, which operates the GPS constellation through its 50th Space Wing, never officially confirmed these satellite-level disruptions. But defense analysts noted that if an adversary had the capability to directly interfere with GPS satellites, it would represent a serious threat to U.S. military operations. Some researchers have suggested that Russia, which has sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities and had intelligence assets in the region, may have demonstrated anti-satellite capabilities as a warning about the limits of U.S. technological superiority. The full extent of GPS disruptions during the Iraq invasion remains classified, but the incidents prompted major investments in GPS hardening and anti-jamming technologies. A microlab, Stanoa-1, the satellite that vanished over the Pacific. In April 1995, Orbital Sciences Corporation launched Microlab 1, a small experimental communications satellite designed to demonstrate technologies for a planned commercial constellation. The satellite was part of the Orbcom system, intended to provide two-way data messaging services globally. Microlab 1 weighed just 43 kilograms and reached orbit successfully. For its first 2 months of operation, it successfully demonstrated message routing and store and forward communications, validating the commercial concept and paving the way for full constellation deployment. Then, in June 1995, while passing over a remote area of the Pacific Ocean, roughly 1,500 kilometers southwest of Hawaii, Microlab 1 suddenly stopped transmitting. Ground controllers at Orbital Sciences facility in Virginia attempted to re-establish contact but received no response. The satellite had gone completely silent over one of the most isolated regions of Earth. What made this failure unusual was its completeness and suddenness. Satellites typically show signs of degradation before complete failure: battery issues, solar panel problems, gradual loss of telemetry. Microlab 1 was functioning perfectly one moment and completely dead the next, with no warning signs in the telemetry data. The satellite's orbit took it over several U.S. military test ranges in the Pacific, including areas used for missile tests, anti-satellite weapons development, and experimental directed energy weapons programs. Some researchers speculated that Microlab 1 might have been accidentally destroyed or disabled by a weapons test, perhaps a high-altitude intercept test, a directed energy weapon test, or electromagnetic pulse effects from a high-altitude detonation. Orbital Sciences concluded that the satellite experienced a catastrophic power system failure, but they couldn't determine the cause because they had lost all telemetry. The location of the failure, far from ground stations, over a military test range, in an area with limited monitoring, meant there were no independent observations of what happened. The loss of Microlab 1 highlighted the vulnerability of satellites passing over remote areas where failures might not be observed, or where testing of classified weapon systems might pose risks to orbital assets. The Molniya Orbit Mysteries. Russia operates a series of communications and early warning satellites in highly elliptical Molniya orbits, a type of orbit specifically designed to provide coverage of high-latitude regions. These orbits are characterized by a 12-hour period, with an apogee of approximately 40,000 kilometers over Russia and a perigee of about 500 kilometers on the opposite side of Earth. Several of these satellites have experienced mysterious failures, while at the high point of their orbits over specific Russian locations, particularly over Siberia, one of Russia's most secretive military regions. In February 2005, Molniya 193 suddenly ceased operations while over Siberia at the apogee of its orbit. Russian Space Forces reported a catastrophic event, but provided no technical details. U.S. Space Command observed that the satellite had broken into at least 15 trackable pieces, creating a debris field that had to be cataloged to avoid collisions. The breakup was energetic, suggesting an internal explosion rather than a collision with space debris. When satellites collide with orbital debris, they typically break into a few large pieces and many small fragments. Molniya 1-93's breakup pattern was more consistent with a propulsion system explosion or deliberate detonation. In June 2008, Molniya 1-91 experienced a similar fate, also breaking up while over Siberia. Again, Russian authorities provided minimal information, citing the satellite's dual civilian and military purposes. The breakup created another debris field, with both breakups occurring within a relatively small geographic region. What made these incidents suspicious was the location and timing. The satellites were over one of Russia's most secretive military regions, an area known for missile testing, nuclear weapons development, and experimental weapons programs. The Plesetsk Cosmodrome, Russia's primary military space launch facility, is in this region. Some Western analysts suggested the satellites might have been deliberately destroyed as part of tests of Russian anti-satellite weapons. Russia has long been developing kinetic kill vehicles and directed energy weapons. Testing such weapons on one's own satellites eliminates the risk of international incident while providing valuable data. However, Russian space agency Roscosmos maintains that the Molniya failures were due to age and degradation of the satellite's propulsion systems. The satellites were old, having exceeded their design lifetimes, and fuel tank failures can cause catastrophic explosions. The truth remains unclear, but multiple Russian satellites have experienced sudden catastrophic failures while over specific Russian territory, in a region where weapons testing occurs regularly. Olympus, disabled over Germany. In August 1993, the European Space Agency's Olympus satellite, one of the largest civilian communication satellites ever built at the time, suffered a catastrophic failure while providing communications coverage over Europe. With a launch mass of 2,595 kilograms and a solar array span of 26 meters, it was substantially larger than typical communication satellites of the era. The official explanation involves a meteor strike during the Perseid meteor shower. On August 11, 1993, Olympus was reportedly hit by a meteoroid that punctured its attitude control fuel tank. The satellite lost attitude control as nitrogen gas escaped through the puncture. Without attitude control, the satellite's solar panels could no longer point at the sun, battery power was depleted, and the satellite tumbled out of its geostationary orbit position. While the meteor strike explanation is widely accepted, some aspects of the Olympus failure remain puzzling. The satellite was over Germany when it experienced the problems, and ESA's official report notes that the satellite experienced unusual electromagnetic interference in the hours before the impact. Interference that could not be fully explained. The interference manifested as periodic bursts of noise across multiple frequency bands used by the satellite's telemetry systems. Ground controllers noted unusual signal characteristics that didn't match typical patterns from thunderstorms or ionospheric disturbances. The interference would appear for several minutes, disappear, then reappear in a pattern that seemed almost regular. Some researchers have suggested that Olympus might have been the target of an experimental anti-satellite weapon test. In the early 1990s, several nations were developing ground-based lasers powerful enough to dazzle or damage satellite sensors. A high-power laser directed at Olympus could have caused the reported electromagnetic interference. The timing is also curious. Olympus failed during a period of heightened military tensions in Europe following the breakup of Yugoslavia. The Bosnian War was underway, and multiple NATO and non-NATO nations had interests in the Balkans conflict. Communication satellites like Olympus were being used to support news coverage and diplomatic communications related to the conflict. ESA stands by its meteoroid impact conclusion, and the evidence is strong. The satellite's fuel tank showed clear signs of puncture and decompression. But the electromagnetic interference that preceded the impact has never been adequately explained. The Chinese ASAT tests hidden victims. In January 2007, China conducted an anti-satellite missile test that would fundamentally change the space domain forever. On January 11th, at approximately 5:28 p.m. local time, China launched a KT-2 rocket carrying a kinetic kill vehicle. The interceptor climbed to an altitude of 850 kilometers and destroyed China's own Fengyun 1C weather satellite. The test was a complete success militarily, demonstrating that China possessed the capability to destroy satellites in low Earth orbit. But the test created the largest space debris event in history. The collision generated over 3,000 pieces of trackable debris larger than 10 centimeters and an estimated 150,000 pieces larger than 1 centimeter. The test was widely condemned internationally as irresponsible and dangerous. NASA calculated that the debris increased the collision risk for operational satellites by several percentage points. The International Space Station had to perform several debris avoidance maneuvers, but what's less well known is that several other satellites experienced anomalies or failures in the days and weeks following the test, while passing through the debris field or over China. Several satellite operators reported unexplained telemetry losses, attitude control problems, and sensor anomalies that coincided with passages through the debris field. More suspiciously, at least 2 classified U.S. military satellites experienced what defense officials described as anomalous events while passing over China in the weeks after the ASAT test. The satellites didn't fail completely, but experienced disruptions that were never publicly explained. Some analysts believe China used the cover of the widely publicized kinetic test to conduct additional, secret demonstrations of anti-satellite capabilities, possibly electronic warfare or directed energy weapons, against other satellites passing overhead. With attention focused on the kinetic kill demonstration, other forms of satellite interference might have gone unnoticed. The U.S. military has never confirmed whether the anomalies experienced by classified satellites were due to debris impacts, electronic warfare, or other causes. But the timing, immediately following China's demonstration of anti-satellite capabilities, raised concerns that the test was more than just a single missile intercept. India's EMISAT and the mysterious shutdown. In April 2019, India launched EMISAT, a satellite designed for electronic intelligence gathering, specifically to detect and map radar emissions from ground, naval, and airborne sources. The satellite was part of India's growing reconnaissance capabilities and was placed into a sun-synchronous orbit at 763 kilometers altitude. EMISAT was placed into orbit successfully and began operations, providing the Indian military with valuable signals intelligence. For the first 5 months, EMISAT functioned as designed, mapping electromagnetic emissions across South Asia, the Indian Ocean, and surrounding regions. Then, in September 2019, EMISAT suddenly stopped transmitting during a pass over the Indian Ocean near the Maldives. Ground controllers at ISRO's Master Control Facility near Bangalore lost contact with the satellite at approximately 2:47 a.m. local time. The satellite remained silent for approximately 38 minutes. When contact was re-established, the satellite had experienced what Indian space officials described as a temporary power anomaly. The Indian Space Research Organization never provided detailed explanation of what caused the power loss. Official statements mentioned only that the satellite's systems had been reset and that operations resumed normally, but this sparse explanation raised more questions than it answered. What made the incident particularly notable was the location and timing. EMISAT went silent while passing over an area of the Indian Ocean where Chinese naval forces regularly operate. China has been expanding its military presence in the Indian Ocean as part of its String of Pearls strategy. An electronic intelligence satellite monitoring Chinese naval activities would be a high-value target. Some defense analysts speculated that EMISAT might have been targeted by Chinese electronic warfare systems operating from ships in the Indian Ocean. If Chinese forces had detected EMISAT's signals intelligence collection activities, they would have strong motivation to disrupt the satellite. India never officially suggested foreign interference was involved, but the incident occurred during a period of heightened tensions between India and China. Just months earlier, the two countries had engaged in a military standoff in the Himalayas. EMISAT continued operating after the incident, but details about what caused its 38-minute blackout over a sensitive maritime region remain classified. These 10 cases represent some of the most mysterious satellite failures and disruptions in the history of space operations. What unites them is that each satellite went silent, experienced anomalies, or suffered catastrophic failures while over specific geographic locations, often over countries with advanced space warfare capabilities or in regions with active military operations. Some of these incidents have official explanations: radiation damage from the South Atlantic anomaly, meteoroid impacts, aging components causing propulsion system failures, software errors. These explanations are plausible and in many cases are supported by technical evidence. But the patterns are troubling. Satellites specifically designed to survive harsh space environments, failing suddenly while over specific countries. Communications disruptions occurring precisely when satellites pass over sensitive military facilities. Catastrophic breakups happening over weapons test ranges. Electronic intelligence satellites experiencing power anomalies over regions where adversary forces operate. Space has become a contested domain over the past 2 decades. Multiple nations now possess anti-satellite weapons, kinetic kill vehicles that physically destroy satellites through high-velocity collisions, directed energy weapons including lasers and high-power microwave systems that can disable sensors and electronics, and cyber warfare capabilities that can disrupt satellite command and control. The United States, Russia, China, and India have all demonstrated kinetic anti-satellite capabilities through tests that physically destroyed satellites. Directed energy weapons are harder to detect and attribute, making them attractive for covert operations. Electronic warfare systems that jam or spoof satellite signals are widely deployed. Not every satellite failure is an attack. Space is genuinely a harsh environment where equipment fails for mundane reasons. Satellites face temperature extremes, radiation bombardment, micrometeoroid impacts, and component degradation. But when satellites go silent over specific locations, especially repeatedly or in patterns, it raises questions about whether some failures are being caused deliberately. The truth about many of these incidents remains classified. Governments don't want to reveal the extent of their anti-satellite capabilities or admit that their satellites have been targeted. Satellite operators don't want to acknowledge vulnerabilities. And in some cases, the evidence has been destroyed, sometimes literally, as with USA 193, shot down before anyone could examine what went wrong. What's clear is that satellites are no longer safe simply because they're in space. The locations they pass over matter. And increasingly, going silent over the wrong place at the wrong time might not be an accident. It might be someone sending a message, testing a capability, or conducting an operation in the new battlefield that extends from Earth's surface to the edge of space.